The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal floors and towering columns that reached toward a ceiling painted with star maps from 1,000 worlds. And Lara Mitchell sat in the human delegation chair, watching species from across the galaxy debate trade agreements with the same passion others might reserve for declarations of war. The Valorian Chancellor, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell, gestured with appendages that flickered like lightning as he argued about shipping routes through the Andromeda Passage. While the insectoid Thraxians clicked their mandibles in rhythmic disagreement, Laura had attended these sessions for 3 years now, and she had learned that humanity's voice carried about as much weight as a whisper in a hurricane. Most species viewed Earth's representative as a formality, a courtesy extended to the young race that had stumbled into faster-than-light travel only 30 years ago. The council members were polite enough, certainly more civil than they were to each other, but Lara could see the dismissal in their multifaceted eyes and energy fields and telepathic pulses. Humans were weak by galactic standards, slow to advance, lacking the technological marvels that define power among the stars. Earth's military consisted of small patrol ships that couldn't match the slowest Valorian cruiser, and humanity's weapons technology made the other species smile with poorly concealed amusement. Laura listened to the debates with the patience that came naturally to her species, taking notes on a simple tablet, while other delegates manipulated holographic displays that could predict market fluctuations across 12 dimensions. She had grown accustomed to being overlooked, and in truth, she preferred it that way. The session was drawing to a close when the chamber's central display suddenly shifted from trade route projections to a tactical military map, and the room fell silent as every species recognized the red markers spreading across the outer rim territories. Chancellor Vorum of the Valorian Collective stood with all 6 of his energy projections fully extended, a sign of extreme concern, and his voice resonated through the chamber with frequencies that made the crystal floor vibrate. The Krell Dominion has taken the Theta systems, he announced, and Lara felt the room's temperature drop as fear rippled through the assembled delegates. The Krell were known throughout the galaxy as conquerors who valued strength above all else and viewed diplomacy as a weakness to be exploited. In 2 months, they have claimed 12 systems, destroying resistance fleets and ignoring every attempt at peaceful negotiation. The Council had sent 3 separate diplomatic missions, and the Krell had responded to each one with the same message: surrender or be destroyed now. The red markers on the map showed the Krell armada moving toward Council space, and mathematical projections predicted they would reach the first core worlds within 6 weeks. Laura watched as panic spread through the chamber, delegates arguing over defensive positions and fleet deployments that everyone knew would be inadequate. The Thraxian Hive Queen clicked out a proposal to consolidate all Council forces into a single defensive line, but the Valorian Chancellor countered that such a move would leave half their worlds unprotected. Laura waited for the arguing to reach its peak before she stood and pressed the request to speak button on her console. Chamber's attention system registered her request and displayed it on the main screen, and Chancellor Varm acknowledged her with what might have been surprise or amusement. It was hard to tell with energy beings. Ambassador Mitchell, humanity wishes to contribute to this discussion, he asked, and Laura heard the subtle condescension in his translated voice. Earth would like to offer our assistance in the defense against the Krell advance, Laura said clearly, her voice calm and steady despite the weight of every species' attention suddenly focused on her. The chamber fell silent for exactly 3 seconds before several delegates began to laugh. Not cruelly, but with the kind of gentle amusement one might show to a child offering to help move furniture. Chancellor Vorum raised an appendage for silence and managed to compose himself into something approaching diplomatic neutrality. Ambassador Mitchell. Humanity's offer is appreciated and noted for the record, he said with practiced political courtesy. However, perhaps Earth's resources would be better utilized in preparing evacuation protocols for your border colonies, rather than military engagement. The Krell fleet consists of vessels that would require your entire planetary defense force just to match a single destroyer, added the Thraxian Queen. Her clicks translated into sympathetic tones. We would not want to see humanity sacrifice itself in a battle beyond its capabilities. Lavra nodded as if she had expected this response, and her expression remained neutral in a way that several delegates would later remember as unusual. I understand the Council's position, she replied. Earth will respect your decision and focus on our own preparations. She gathered her tablet and returned to her seat, while the Council resumed their increasingly desperate strategic planning. And no one noticed when she composed a brief message and sent it through the quantum communication network back to Earth. The message traveled faster than light across 30 parsecs of space and reached Admiral Kevin Bryant aboard the Orbital Command station that hung in synchronized orbit above Earth's North American continent. He read the message on his private terminal, his weathered face showing no emotion as he absorbed the 4 words Laura had sent. They refused. Proceed carefully. Kevin stood and walked to the observation deck where Earth turned below him in peaceful blues and greens and whites, the cradle of humanity appearing as serene as it had for millions of years. He looked past Earth toward the darkness beyond Mars, where the navigation charts showed nothing but empty space and asteroid fields. Computer, transmit activation code Omega-7 to Facility Prime, he said quietly. The computer acknowledged his command with a soft chime. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Neptune, in the frozen reaches where no ship had reason to venture, massive structures that had waited in silence for 300 years began to wake. Power systems that had maintained minimal operation for generations surged to full capacity, and engines larger than most space stations started their ignition sequences. The silent fleet, humanity's deepest secret, stirred in the darkness like a sleeping giant opening its eyes. Kevin sent a brief response back to Lavra. Protocol 7 approved. Maintain position and observe. He knew that within 72 hours the galaxy would learn what humanity had been building while the other species dismissed them as weak and primitive. The Council thought humanity was young and inexperienced, and they were right about the first, but catastrophically wrong about the second. Earth had learned from 10,000 years of human history that peace was a gift that required the strength to protect it. And humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing for the day when someone would mistake their desire for peace as an inability to wage war. Kevin looked out at the peaceful planet below and thought about all the children playing in parks who had no idea what moved in the darkness beyond their world. He thought about the billions of humans across dozens of colonies who lived their lives believing Earth had only a small defensive fleet. They were safer not knowing the truth, safer believing humanity was as weak as the galaxy assumed. The Krell would learn soon enough, and Kevin hoped that after they learned, they would live to share the lesson with others who might make the same mistake in the council chambers. Lavra Mitchell sat quietly and listened to species panic about an enemy they didn't know how to fight. And she felt a moment of genuine sadness that it had come to this. Humanity had hoped to never reveal what they had built in silence. But the Krell had made the choice for them. Soon the galaxy would see what humanity had hidden among the stars, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Valorian Fourth Fleet died in fire and silence. 1,200 ships reduced to expanding clouds of debris and frozen atmosphere in less than 20 minutes. And the Galactic Council received the distress signals 3 hours after the last Valorian ship had ceased transmitting. Chancellor Vorm stood before the emergency assembly with his energy form flickering in patterns that translated as grief and terror, displaying tactical recordings of the battle that showed Krell warships tearing through Valorian shields as if they were made of paper. Laura Mitchell sat in her delegation chair and watched the recordings with the same calm attention she gave to trade disputes, her face revealing nothing while species around her wept or raged or calculated their own chances of survival. The Thraxian queen's clicking had become erratic and sharp, a sign of extreme distress in her species, while the crystalline Zephyrins had dimmed their inner light to the point of near invisibility in their version of mourning. The Fourth Fleet represented our strongest defensive force, Vorum announced, his voice carrying harmonics of despair. The Krell destroyed them with minimal losses, perhaps 50 ships out of their fleet of 4,000. Mathematical projections appeared on the central display, showing the Krell advance continuing unchecked through Council territory. And every calculation ended with the same conclusion: total defeat within 8 weeks. The Council dissolved into arguments that grew more desperate with each passing hour. Species proposing strategies that everyone knew would fail, and making promises of reinforcements that would arrive too. Late to matter, Laura raised her hand to request recognition, but received no acknowledgement. The Council, too consumed by panic to notice the human delegate, she lowered her hand and returned to making notes while the galaxy prepared to burn 3 days after the Fourth Fleet's destruction. The first anomalies began appearing in reports from ships passing through human-controlled space. A Thraxian merchant vessel detected massive gravitational fluctuations near Jupiter that couldn't be explained by the gas giant's natural field, and their captain filed a routine report that disappeared into the Council's overflowing database of war preparations. A Valorian science ship registered energy signatures between Saturn and Uranus that matched no known natural phenomenon or conventional power source. Readings that suggested something enormous was drawing power from multiple sources. The science ship's captain noted the readings but attributed them to sensor malfunctions caused by stress, and the report never reached anyone who might have questioned the explanation. Laura attended every emergency council session and offered nothing beyond her presence, listening to strategies and counter-proposals with the patience that other species had come to expect from humanity. But she noticed how other delegates had stopped asking about Earth's preparations, and how no one questioned why human colonies were evacuating with such methodical efficiency. Daniel Carter worked as an engineer on the Council's Central Coordination Vessel, maintaining systems that kept thousands of ships connected across light years of space. And he had served in this position long enough that most species barely noticed him anymore. He was adjusting power distribution to the communication arrays when 3 Zephyrin technicians approached him during a maintenance shift, their crystalline bodies pulsing with curious light patterns. Engineer Carter, may we ask about Earth's defensive preparations? The lead Zephyrin inquired, their translated voice carrying genuine concern. We have noticed that human colonies are evacuating with remarkable coordination. Daniel continued his work on the power relay for a moment before responding, his hand steady as he calibrated energy flow to optimal levels. We're just being careful, he said casually, preparing for the possibility that the war might reach our space. But your evacuation appears so practiced, another Zephyrin observed, as if humanity has prepared for this specific scenario. Daniel smiled in a way that made all 3 Zephyrins go very still, their light patterns freezing in mid-pulse. We've been preparing for this conversation for 300 years, he said quietly, still working on the relay, as if discussing nothing more important than weather patterns. We just never wanted to have it. The Zephyrins exchanged pulses of light that translated as confusion mixed with sudden unease. But before they could ask what Daniel meant, an alarm sounded throughout the vessel, announcing another Krell advancement. The technicians hurried away to their stations, And Daniel finished his calibrations while wondering how much longer humanity's secret would remain hidden. Krell Dominion's Supreme Commander reviewed intelligence reports from scouts investigating potential conquest targets. And one particular report caught his attention because of how it ended. The scout party had been surveying human space, cataloging Earth's pathetically small defense fleet and mapping colony locations, when they detected something between Jupiter and Saturn that their sensors couldn't properly identify. The final transmission from the scout ship was fragmented and confused. The communication officer reporting massive objects moving in the darkness before the signal cut to static. The Supreme Commander dismissed the report as equipment failure caused by Jupiter's magnetic field, and he marked human space as a low-priority target that could be conquered after more defended systems fell. He never considered that the scout ship had actually found something, and that it would never send another report. Laura received coded updates from Earth through quantum encrypted channels that existed on frequencies the Council had never thought to monitor. And she read each message with the kind of focus others might reserve for religious texts. Admiral Kevin Bryant reported that the Silent Fleet had completed activation sequences and all vessels were operating at full combat readiness. Their crews trained in simulators for generations, now taking positions on ships that had existed only as theoretical constructs until recently. Updates included images that Laura studied in her private quarters, photographs of vessels so massive that Earth itself could fit inside some of their cargo bays, ships built with technologies that other species had never imagined because they had never needed to. Humanity had taken every military innovation from their violent history and refined it across 3 centuries of secret research, combining human creativity with resources gathered from asteroid mining operations that the galaxy assumed were for civilian industry. The Council believed humanity mined asteroids for construction, materials, and rare elements to support colony growth, and they were technically correct. But no one had asked what humanity was actually constructing. Laura closed the files and prepared for another Council session, knowing that each day brought the Krull closer and brought humanity closer to revealing what they had built in silence. She thought about Kevin's message from the previous day, a simple question that carried enormous weight. Are they worth saving? Laura had sent back an equally simple answer: yes, even if they don't know it yet. The Council chambers filled with delegates who looked more exhausted with each passing session. Species that had never faced a threat they couldn't negotiate or intimidate, now confronting an enemy that recognized only strength. Laura took her seat and waited, watching the Krull advance markers creep closer on the tactical displays, knowing that soon Chancellor Varm would have no choice but to accept humanity's help. She had been authorized to offer Earth's assistance only once, and the Council had refused. But protocol allowed for one more offer under specific circumstances. Those circumstances would arrive when the Council faced total defeat with no alternatives remaining. And Laura estimated that moment would come within 48 hours based on current Krull advancement rates in the darkness beyond Neptune. The Silent Fleet conducted final system checks and waited for orders that would change everything. Admiral Kevin Bryant stood on the bridge of a ship called Sanctuary, a vessel 3 times the size of the largest Krull dreadnought, and he looked at tactical displays showing 96 other ships like it positioned throughout the outer solar system. Each ship carried weapons that could shatter moons and engines that could outrun anything in known space, and every captain had memorized the protocols that governed when and how these weapons could be used. Humanity had built the Silent Fleet not for conquest but for protection, and the difference mattered more than the galaxy would initially understand. Kevin sent a brief message to all ship commanders: prepare for revelation. Remember who we are and why we exist. 96 captains read the message and responded with acknowledgement. And the silent fleet waited in silence for the galaxy to learn what humanity had hidden among the stars. The Krell Supreme Commander's ultimatum arrived at the Galactic Council through every communication channel simultaneously, a message designed to demonstrate dominance and eliminate any hope of ignoring its contents. Chancellor Vorum played the recording for the assembled delegates, and the Supreme Commander's voice filled the chamber with the kind of certainty that came from never having experienced defeat species of the Galactic Council. Your resistance is futile, and your military forces are pathetic. The translation rendered his words with brutal clarity. You have 48 hours to surrender all territories and submit to Dominion authority. The recording shifted to show Krell warships arranged in perfect formation, thousands of vessels gleaming against the backdrop of stars. And the Supreme Commander's image reappeared with what might have been a smile on his predatory features. We will demonstrate our superiority by conquering the weakest among you first, he continued. And Lara Mitchell felt the attention of every delegate shift toward her. The humans will serve as an example of what happens to species who believe they can resist the Dominion. The recording ended with coordinates for Earth's location and a promise to broadcast the conquest across all council frequencies so every species could witness humanity's defeat. The council chamber erupted into chaos, delegates shouting over each other in languages and telepathic pulses that the translation system struggled to process. Chancellor Vorum called for order repeatedly before the noise subsided enough for structured discussion. And Lara noticed how many species were looking at her with expressions that translated as pity mixed with relief that the Krell had chosen someone else as their first target. We cannot allow this, the Thraxian Queen declared, her mandibles clicking with agitation. Even if Earth lacks military strength, they are members of this council. What can we do? A Zephyran delegate asked, their crystal form pulsing with helpless frustration. We cannot defeat the Krell fleet, and any defensive force we send to Earth will be destroyed alongside humanity. Lara stood and pressed her request to speak button. And this time, Chancellor Vorum acknowledged her immediately, perhaps feeling he owed humanity that much courtesy before their extinction. Ambassador Mitchell, Earth wishes to address the council? He asked, and his energy field flickered with what might have been sympathy. I would like to renew humanity's offer to assist in defense against the Krell, Lara said calmly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise with unexpected clarity. The chamber fell silent, and Lara could feel the confusion radiating from delegates who couldn't comprehend why humanity would volunteer to fight when they were already marked for destruction. Ambassador, with respect, Vorum said gently, Earth's military forces would not survive contact with even a small portion of the Krell Armada. Then you have nothing to lose by accepting our help, Lara responded, and she pulled up a tactical display that showed coordinates throughout council space, marked with human designation codes. What are these locations? The Thraxian Queen asked, her clicking pattern shifting to something curious rather than agitated. If the Council grants humanity operational command of defensive operations, all Council forces must stay clear of these coordinates, Lara explained. And she expanded the display to show hundreds of marked positions throughout the outer territories. You want us to abandon defensive positions? A Valorian admiral interjected, his energy form flaring with incredulity. I want you to trust that humanity knows what we're doing, Lara said. And something in her tone made several delegates lean forward with sudden attention. Chancellor Vorum looked at the tactical display and then at Lara, and she could see him calculating the odds of various scenarios in his highly advanced consciousness. The Council had no other options, no strategies that showed even a slight chance of success. And if humanity wanted to throw themselves into a suicidal battle, perhaps it would at least delay the Krell long enough for other species to prepare final evacuations. Very well, Vorum announced after conferring briefly with senior council members. Humanity is granted operational authority for defensive coordination. All council forces will maintain positions clear of the designated coordinates. Thank you, Chancellor, Laura said. And she transmitted a single word through her encrypted quantum. Channel back to Earth. Unleash. Admiral Kevin Bryant received the authorization while standing on the bridge of Sanctuary, and he took a moment to look at the faces of his command crew before giving the order that would change galactic history. All ships, activate full power systems and prepare for combat operations, he said clearly, his voice carrying the 96 other bridges through instantaneous quantum communication. Proceed to designated emergence coordinates throughout the outer solar system. The Silent Fleet powered up systems that had waited in darkness for 300 years, and engines that could tear holes in space-time began their activation sequences. The ships moved with a grace that seemed impossible for vessels of their size, accelerating to speeds that conventional physics said should rip them apart. But humanity had learned to manipulate gravitational fields in ways other species had never imagined. They had studied every war Earth had ever fought and learned that surprise was often more valuable than superior numbers. And they had built accordingly. The Krell Armada entered council space with the confidence of predators who had never encountered prey capable of fighting back. Their 4,000 warships maintaining formation while their Supreme Commander broadcast his approach on all frequencies so every species could witness the beginning of their subjugation. Krell tactical officers monitored sensor readings that showed the expected council defense fleet positioning exactly where intelligence had predicted. Weak formations that would collapse under the first assault. Supreme Commander, we are detecting unusual readings in Sector 7. A sensor technician reported, confusion evident in his tone. Define unusual, the Supreme Commander ordered, his attention focused on calculating the optimal approach vector for maximum psychological impact. Multiple large objects emerging from faster-than-light travel, the technician replied, his confusion shifting to alarm. Extremely large objects. Sir, the main display shifted to show what Krell sensors were detecting, and the Supreme Commander felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Uncertainty ships were appearing in the darkness between worlds, vessels that matched no configuration in Krell intelligence databases. And the size readings suggested sensor malfunctions, because nothing should be that massive. How many contacts? The Supreme Commander demanded. 97 and still counting, the technician responded, his voice rising with each word. Supreme Commander, these vessels are each larger than our dreadnoughts. Admiral Kevin Bryant watched the Krell fleet on his tactical display and felt a weight settle on his shoulders that had nothing to do with combat acceleration. He was about to reveal what humanity had built in secret, and there would be no going back from this moment. All ships, weapons free, he transmitted to the fleet. Target their engines and weapons systems. Minimize casualties where possible. 96 captains acknowledged the order and prepared to fire weapons that no other species had seen before. Weapons that humanity hoped would end the war quickly enough that mercy would still be possible. Supreme Commander, the unknown vessels are powering weapons, the Krell sensor technician reported, and his voice carried the kind of fear that came from finally recognizing a superior predator. The Supreme Commander opened a communication channel to the approaching human fleet, intending to demand identification and assert dominance. But the message he received from Admiral Kevin Bryant cut off his planned speech. Krell warships, you threatened to conquer Earth and promised to use humanity as an example. Kevin's voice came through with perfect clarity. Now you will learn why we chose silence over boasting, and why we built what we hid in darkness. The first salvo from the Silent Fleet lit up space with energies that Krell sensors couldn't properly categorize, and the Supreme Commander watched in horror as his forward battlegroups simply ceased to exist, not destroyed in conventional terms, but torn apart by weapons that manipulated gravity itself, crushing warships into singularities smaller than atoms before dispersing the compressed matter across light years. The Krell Armada, which had conquered 12 systems without significant resistance, discovered what it meant to face an enemy that had spent 3 centuries preparing for war while maintaining the appearance of peace. Laura Mitchell sat in the council chamber and watched the tactical displays update with information being transmitted from the battle. And she saw the exact moment when every delegate realized that humanity had lied through omission for 30 years. Chancellor Vorum turned to look at her with his energy form pulsing in patterns that translated as shock and something approaching betrayal. "What have you done?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was really asking what humanity had been doing all along. "What we needed to," Lawver replied quietly. "What we hoped we would never have to reveal." The Krell fleet's second wave attempted a tactical withdrawal, their commanders recognizing too late that they faced something beyond their combat doctrine's ability to counter. But the silent fleet moved with impossible speed and precision. Admiral Kevin Bryant coordinated the engagement from Sanctuary's bridge while monitoring casualty reports that he wished showed higher numbers on the human side and lower numbers on the Krell side. Though he knew the mathematics of war favored overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. "Target their propulsion systems," he ordered, for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, emphasizing to his weapons officers that disabled ships were preferable to destroyed ones. "I want survivors who can tell their people what happened here." The battle unfolded across 3-dimensional space in patterns that resembled a complex dance more than conventional warfare, with human vessels moving through Krell formations like water flowing around stones. Krell tactical officers attempted to analyze human ship movements and predict attack vectors, but their computers couldn't process maneuvers that violated every principle of known physics. What they didn't understand was that humanity had learned to manipulate gravitational fields not just for propulsion, but for protection, creating zones of altered space-time around their vessels that made conventional weapons fire curve away from intended targets. The Silent Fleet's weapons demonstrated technologies that the Galactic Council had never imagined possible, and watching species began to understand the true scope of what humanity had hidden: gravity lances that could compress matter to the density of neutron stars, creating temporary singularities that consumed everything within their effective radius before safely dissipating energy beams that didn't just penetrate shields, but collapsed the quantum fields that generated them, leaving enemy vessels defenseless before secondary weapons disabled their critical systems. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds through gravity manipulation, traveling so fast that they arrived before sensors could detect their launch, each impact releasing enough energy to vaporize battleships. But more disturbing to observers than the weapons themselves was how humanity used them with restraint that bordered on theatrical. Council delegates watched tactical feeds showing human vessels deliberately missing vital systems, choosing to disable rather than destroy, targeting engines and weapons while carefully avoiding crew compartments. Laura Mitchell stood before the emergency council session that had convened within an hour of the battle's beginning, and she faced questions that came in every language and telepathic frequency the galaxy knew. "How long have you possessed this technology?" Chancellor Vorum demanded, his energy form fluctuating with patterns that translated as betrayal and anger mixed with awe. "We began construction of the Silent Fleet 287 years ago," Lawver replied with the calm directness that had characterized all her council appearances. "Shortly after humanity achieved faster-than-light capability and discovered we were not alone in the universe. You lied to us. a Thraxian delegate accused, mandibles clicking with agitation. For 3 decades, you presented yourselves as weak and primitive. We never lied, Lavra corrected gently. We simply didn't advertise everything we were capable of achieving, which is not the same as deception. She activated a holographic display that showed Earth's solar system, and the image zoomed out to reveal structures hidden throughout the outer planets that Council surveys had somehow never detected manufacturing. Stations buried inside asteroids that had been mining and processing materials for centuries. Their operations camouflaged as natural geological activity shipyards constructed within the rings of Saturn and Uranus. Massive facilities that could build vessels the size of moons while remaining invisible to conventional scanning research. Installations on remote moons where human scientists had pushed the boundaries of physics far beyond what other species had achieved, driven by the knowledge that Earth's survival might one day depend on technological superiority. Every colony ship humanity sent out carried hidden manufacturing capabilities. Lavra explained as the display showed human settlements across 24 worlds. Every trade agreement we signed included contingency protocols. Every peaceful interaction was supported by preparations for war. Why? The Zephyran delegate asked, their crystalline form pulsing with genuine confusion. Why build such power and hide it? Lavra was quiet for a moment before responding, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of human history and planning. Because the moment you knew we had this capability, everything would have changed, she said. You would have feared us, courted us for military alliances, or tried to destroy us before we became a threat. We wanted to be judged by our character rather than our weapons, she continued, gesturing to the tactical feeds still showing the ongoing battle. We wanted genuine friendships based on mutual respect, not political relationships born from fear or military necessity. The council chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications of what Lavra was saying, and several species began reviewing their interactions with humanity through this new lens of understanding. Every time Earth had appeared weak or unprepared, it had been a deliberate choice to avoid changing the galaxy's power dynamics. Every council session where Lavra had sat quietly while other species debated had been humanity observing and learning, without revealing their true capabilities. Daniel Carter had been working among council species for years, maintaining systems and gathering intelligence, while everyone assumed he was just another human technician trying to be helpful. The battle continued. For 3 hours before the Krell Supreme Commander finally accepted that continuing to fight would only result in the complete destruction of his fleet. He opened a communication channel to Admiral Kevin Bryant with the kind of reluctance that came from pride meeting necessity. Human Commander, the Krell Dominion requests terms for cessation of hostilities, he transmitted. And Kevin could hear the struggle in his voice to form those words. Unconditional surrender of all Krell forces. Kevin replied immediately. All vessels will power down weapons and allow boarding parties to verify compliance. The Dominion does not surrender, the Supreme Commander began. But Kevin interrupted with a tone that suggested he had prepared this speech long before the battle began. You threatened to conquer Earth and use humanity as an example, Kevin said, his voice carrying across open channels that half the galaxy was monitoring. You mocked our desire for peace and promised to broadcast our defeat. Now you will surrender unconditionally, or I will reduce your fleet to atoms. The tactical display showed the Krell fleet's remaining ships, less than half their original strength, surrounded by human vessels that could destroy them at any moment. The Supreme Commander looked at his displays and recognized the mathematics of an unwinnable situation, and he gave the order that no Krell commander had given in living memory. All Krell vessels, stand down and await boarding, he transmitted, and the pride in his voice died with each word. Within minutes, human marines were docking with Krell vessels, and Council observers watched in amazement as the first priority wasn't securing weapons or taking prisoners, but establishing medical triage for Krell. Wounded Admiral Kevin Bryant transmitted orders throughout the fleet that every Krell casualty was to receive the same medical care as human wounded, and he sent teams of human doctors and medical supplies to Krell ships where life support had been damaged. Galactic Council watched humanity achieve overwhelming military victory and then immediately extend compassion to their defeated enemy. And the cognitive dissonance was almost too much for some species to process. Laura received a message from Kevin through their quantum link. A simple question that carried enormous weight. What now? She looked around the council chamber at species who had dismissed humanity for decades and now stared at her with mixtures of fear, respect, and confusion. Now we show them who we really are, she transmitted back. And she prepared to address the council with honesty that would shape the galaxies. Future Chancellor Vorem called for order as delegates argued among themselves about implications and potential responses. And his energy form pulsed with authority until the chamber quieted. Ambassador Mitchell? The Council demands a full accounting of Earth's military capabilities and strategic intentions, he stated formally. Though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he actually wanted to know the answers, Laura stood and faced the assembled delegates with the same calm demeanor she had maintained for 3 years. But now there was steel beneath the courtesy. Humanity will share a full inventory of our defensive capabilities, she began. And we will offer to provide some technologies to council species under specific conditions. What conditions? The Thraxian Queen asked warily. That these technologies are used only for defense, never for conquest, Lava replied. Any species that violates this agreement will face the full force of the Silent Fleet. She paused to let that sink in before continuing with words that would define humanity's role in galactic politics for centuries to come. We built this fleet to protect ourselves and those we care about, she said. We hope to never reveal it, but the Krell forced our hand. Now the galaxy knows what we're capable of, and we will use that capability to. 6 months after the battle that changed everything, Lavra Mitchell walked through council chambers where delegates now stepped aside to let her pass and greeted her with respect that bordered on reverence, mixed with carefully concealed fear. The Krell Supreme Commander had surrendered unconditionally, and Admiral Kevin Bryant had shocked the galaxy by immediately beginning rescue operations for Krell survivors rather than executing prisoners or demanding reparations. Human medical teams had worked alongside Krell doctors to save lives on both sides of the conflict, and every species that witnessed this display of compassion had been forced to reconsider their understanding of what strength actually meant. The Galactic Council had convened an emergency session that lasted 3 weeks, during which Laura had presented a complete accounting of humanity's military capabilities while carefully explaining the philosophy that had guided their development. We studied Earth's history and learned that peace without strength is temporary, she had told the assembled delegates. Every civilization that assumed goodwill would protect them eventually faced conquest by those who valued power over cooperation. The Council had struggled to process information that contradicted 30 years of assumptions about humanity's place in galactic hierarchy. Earth's colonies weren't just settlements, but strategic positions selected for defensive value, each one containing hidden manufacturing facilities that could produce warships if needed. Human trade agreements weren't simply commercial arrangements, but intelligence gathering operations that had mapped every major power's military capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities. The peaceful scientists and engineers humanity had sent to work among other species had been trained observers who reported back information that helped refine defensive strategies. Laura had watched council members cycle through emotions ranging from betrayal to grudging admiration as they realized how thoroughly humanity had prepared for scenarios no one believed would occur. Chancellor Varm had been particularly vocal in his conflicted response, his energy form flickering between anger at the deception and relief that Earth's power was directed toward defensive rather than aggressive purposes. How can we trust species that hid such capabilities from us? He had demanded during one heated session. The same way we trust species who would have treated us differently if they had known. Lavra had replied calmly, by recognizing that everyone makes strategic decisions based on incomplete information. The treaty that emerged from those 3 weeks of negotiation established new protocols for galactic security, with humanity agreeing to share specific defensive technologies in exchange for Council acceptance of Earth's role as primary peacekeeping force. It was an arrangement born from necessity rather than preference, but it created a framework that gave the galaxy its first genuine hope for a lasting peace. Daniel Carter had been promoted from engineer to the Council's chief defense coordinator, a position that granted him authority to review and approve military deployments throughout Council space. He sat in meetings with species who had barely acknowledged his existence months earlier, and he presented strategic assessments that drew on 3 centuries of human military theory combined with observed data from galactic conflicts. The Thraxian Queen had asked him during one such meaning how humanity had managed to keep such extensive preparations secret for so long. We learned from watching other species make the mistake of announcing their capabilities before they were ready to defend them, Daniel had explained. Every war in galactic history started because someone believed they could win. We made sure no one would believe they could win against Earth. The technologies humanity shared with Council species were carefully selected to enhance defensive capabilities without enabling aggressive expansion. And every transfer came with monitoring protocols that the Silent Fleet would enforce gravity shield generators that could protect civilian populations but required too much power to be practical for warship use. Early warning sensor networks that could detect hostile fleet movements but couldn't target offensive weapons. Medical technologies that could treat injuries from advanced weapons but provided no tactical advantage in combat. Species that accepted these technologies found their defensive capabilities significantly enhanced, while those who attempted to reverse engineer offensive applications discovered that human engineers had built-in safeguards that made such efforts futile or dangerous. The Krell Dominion had been offered the same technologies as other species, along with reconstruction assistance that the Supreme Commander had initially refused out of wounded pride. Kevin Brian had personally traveled to the Krell homeworld to meet with their leadership, and the conversation that followed had been recorded and studied by military strategists across the galaxy. We defeated you because we were better prepared, not because we are inherently superior, Kevin had told the Krell Council. Your mistake was assuming that peaceful behavior meant weak capability, and that is a lesson worth learning without further bloodshed. The Krell had eventually accepted humanitarian aid and defensive technologies, and their integration into the new galactic security framework had been slower than other species, but ultimately successful. Laura stood before the Council now 6 months after revelation, and presented quarterly reports on the Silent Fleet's activities with the same calm professionalism she had always demonstrated. The fleet had intercepted 3 attempted pirate raids on remote colonies, disabled the vessels without casualties, and delivered the raiders to appropriate legal authorities. They had assisted with disaster relief on 2 worlds struck by natural catastrophes, using their massive cargo capacity to transport supplies and their advanced sensors to locate survivors. They had maintained patrol routes throughout Council space that deterred aggressive action simply through their presence. And every species had learned that human vessels appeared wherever stability was. Threatened Chancellor Vorum acknowledged Laura's report and then asked a question that had been building throughout the session. Ambassador Mitchell, the Council wishes to know humanity's long-term strategic intentions, he said formally. Now that you have revealed your capabilities, what role does Earth envision in galactic affairs? Lavra had been expecting this question and had prepared her answer through extensive consultation with Earth's government and Admiral Bryant. Humanity's primary goal remains unchanged from the day we joined this council, she began. We want to live peacefully alongside other species, raise our children in safety, and contribute to galactic civilization. The difference now is that everyone understands we have the capability to protect that peace. She continued, we will use the silent fleet to prevent aggressive conquest and maintain stability. But we have no interest in controlling other species or imposing human values on those who prefer different systems. We are not conquerors, she emphasized. We are protectors who build weapons we hope never to reveal. And now that the galaxy knows what we hid in silence, we intend to use that knowledge to ensure no species needs to fear extinction from aggressive neighbors. The Council received this statement with mixed reactions. But Laura noticed that fewer delegates looked fearful than had 6 months earlier. Humanity's consistent demonstration of restraint and compassion had done more to build trust than any diplomatic speech could have accomplished. A Zephyrin delegate raised a question that had been circulating among smaller species who had always been vulnerable to larger powers. If humanity is committed to protection, does that extend to species who cannot contribute militarily to collective defense? They asked, their crystalline form pulsing with hope. It extends to any species that wants to live peacefully. Lavra confirmed. The silent fleet exists to prevent conquest regardless of the victim's military strength. She could see relief spreading through delegates from smaller civilizations who had spent centuries navigating between larger powers. And she understood that humanity's revelation had fundamentally altered galactic power dynamics in ways that would take generations to fully comprehend. After the session ended, Lavra returned to her quarters and composed a message to Kevin Bryant that summarized the Council's current mood and strategic assessment. They're beginning to understand that we meant what we said about protection, she wrote. Fear is gradually being replaced by cautious trust. Though several species still maintain defensive postures in case humanity's intentions change. Kevin's response arrived within minutes through their quantum link. Then we continue demonstrating through actions rather than words. The fleet remains ready, but hope we stay in the shadows where we belong. Lavra smiled at his phrasing because it captured perfectly what humanity had tried to achieve from the beginning. They had built overwhelming force specifically so they could avoid using it. Created weapons of unimaginable power precisely because they understood the responsibility that came with such capability. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's silence, interpreting peaceful behavior as weakness rather than choice. And the revelation of the silent fleet had forced every species to reconsider assumptions about the relationship between military strength and moral character. 300 years earlier, when humanity had first achieved faster-than-light travel and discovered a galaxy full of older civilizations, they